You've said to Rai, well then, I'll be in your care. Ray assured her he'd take care of it, then proceeded to demonstrate. He had just extended one foot, then he forgot which foot he was supposed to extend first. She shouted, no, I want this one. The butler couldn't argue further and said he would check if the dog had an owner. Eve sat on the side feeling utterly speechless. As she had expected, Ray was truly unreliable. At this moment, Yubit suddenly spoke up. This person has quite the potential. With proper training, he'd definitely make a good knight. When he makes this move, the distance between his feet should be a bit wider. Eve relayed all of Yubit's words to Rai. Rai began training according to Eve's instructions. After a while, he suddenly shouted, Miss, I think I've grasped the essence of this move. Just as Eve was about to praise him, she heard Haley say, you're about to get busy again. It was proven that diligent training really does lead to improvement. Only the person improving wasn't Eve, it was Rai. Rai's fundamentals were becoming increasingly solid and he had grasped many key points of the movements. His strength was slowly increasing. This showed that Yubit's guidance was very effective. However, for someone like Eve who lacked talent, no amount of guidance seemed to help. Yubits kept mocking Eve. I guess the magic power in your body is hindering your muscle growth. Eve's face darkened. Can 0.5 magic power really hinder muscle growth? I really don't understand why you chose me as your master, Yubit continued. Those with talent don't necessarily need me, but you need me. Eve was infuriated by Yubit, so you're saying I'm the most useless person when it comes to swordsmanship? The next moment, two knights approached Eve. Miss, please teach us swordsmanship too. This woman had intended to learn swordsmanship, but with the Holy Sword's guidance, she became a swordsmanship teacher for the knights. Just then a man suddenly burst into tears. Young lady, this is a miracle created by your kindness. We'll never have to buy expensive wood again. I'll distribute the fire to the servants right away. Everyone will be grateful to you. Looking at the approaching knights, Eve was completely baffled. She opened her mouth to ask what they wanted. The two knights were startled, too scared to speak. One knight mustered up courage and said, Rhea's made such great progress, all thanks to your guidance. We heard you're extremely proficient in swordsmanship. Such a level isn't something an ordinary person can achieve. You're amazing, Mississippi. The knight kept showering her with praise. Eve, of course, knew it was all thanks to the Holy Sword. She had nothing to do with it. Then the knight suddenly asked if Eve's earlier desire to learn swordsmanship was actually to guide them. Eve was about to deny it, but the knight didn't give her a chance. It's our fault for not recognizing your intentions. From now on, we'll follow you to the death, Mississippi. Left with no choice, Eve agreed to their request to guide their sword practice. She helplessly repeated Yuba's words. What is all this about? Haley continued to make sarcastic remarks, mocking Eve. The next second a voice came, looks like you're doing well, only to see Duke Oberon wearing a long coat and looking serious. Walk over. He calmly greeted Eve, long time no see. Eve responded to her father with an expressionless face. Hello, I didn't expect you to come here personally. The two stood face to face. Neither spoke. The atmosphere was as heavy as if they were enemies. Yubit whispered to Haley, does the master's father hate the master? Haley nodded. Looking at them, it seems to be beyond just hate. Eve smiled at the Duke. If you want to see the blue key, you can go directly to Labasius's blacksmith shop. The Duke frowned and spoke. Coldly, aren't you going to show me the way? Hearing the Duke's tone, Eve's attitude also cooled. She looked at the Duke with an impatient expression. With that, he ran off in a flash. He was left bewildered, but she figured she had done a good deed. Haley and Yubit, standing nearby, couldn't help but exclaim how similar these two were. Eve sighed, calming herself down, then let's go. The blacksmith shop is some distance from here. Should we find a carriage? The Duke directly refused. Let's walk there. Can you believe it? These two people who seemed so unfamiliar were actually father and daughter. Even wanted to call a carriage but was refused by the Duke. So the two could only awkwardly walk together to the blacksmith shop. The atmosphere was very quiet at this moment. You couldn't help but steal a glance at the Duke. The Duke frowned, looking very cold. But in the original story, the relationship between this father and daughter wasn't good. It was normal to feel awkward. At this moment, the Duke suddenly spoke. You look well. Eve was startled. Did he think she was living too well as a punished person? Eve replied calmly, because the people here are all very kind. The Duke sneered. You actually say the people in the north are kind. This is the first time I've heard such an evaluation. Eve laughed dryly. Actually, I only discovered this after interacting with them for a long time. That's when I found out. The Duke nodded. It seems you've experienced quite a lot here. He was confused. She hadn't told the Duke about things here. The Duke stated that the Baron would regularly write letters reporting on Eve's situation. The Duke pondered for a moment, then said, since you don't write to me, I can only inquire about your news from others. I heard you even raised a dog. Hearing these words, Eve couldn't help but think to herself, was the Duke complaining that she hadn't written to him? The two walked in silence for a while. Just as the Duke was about to say something more, Eve interrupted him. The blacksmith's shop is right ahead. The two entered the blacksmith's shop. The Duke picked up the blue key and asked in disbelief, "Is this really made from black ironwood?" Lebedges quickly answered the Duke, "Yes, the manufacturing process isn't difficult, you just need to get the timing right." The Duke lowered his head and posed a question. "I want to know, why did you tell us about this? The only place in the world that produces black ironwood is Alir." Meanwhile, in the room of Alara's territory manager, and Scythia was deep in thought, "I can't believe she managed to ignite the black ironwood." "Aren't you afraid we'll use it for something bad?" Lebedges looked at the Duke very firmly. "I'm not afraid because I trust Eve. She won't use these things to do bad things." The Duke was somewhat surprised. He hadn't expected Lebedges to trust his daughter so much. Labasius was about to say that the whole village trusted Eve because she had pulled out the holy sword. But before he could finish, Eve interrupted. "Actually, this is because I passed their test. That's why they trust me so much." The demon who had lived for over 2,000 years was almost unable to suppress its desires. But the solution was actually to empathize with humans. What should be done? Eve was very shocked to hear Ubit's words. "Do we really need physical contact?" Haley angrily shouted at Ubit. "Holy sword, how could you say such a thing?" Eve leaned close to Haley and asked, "Is this the only solution besides killing? Then why don't you use this method?" Haley sat on the table with a gloomy expression. "Because I hate humans, so I'm not willing to." Eve looked at Haley speechlessly. "I'm human too. It's not appropriate to say this in front of me." So Haley quickly added, "Except for humans who aren't clothes." He seriously began to speak the terms of the contract. "After the contract, your soul will have my scent, so I won't dislike you. This is the privilege of the summoner. Only you have this privilege." Then Haley started to freak out, but the holy sword suggestion was as good as useless. Who would do that kind of thing with someone they dislike? All this time, everyone thought Eve's magic power was extremely low. It seems her father, Duke Oberon, hid it too well. Their family could already rival the royal family. Now with this daughter, it appears this nominal exile is actually a test from the Duke for his daughter. Eve chimed in, "Didn't you say you don't dislike me?" As soon as the words left her mouth, Haley's eyes widened, frozen in place. Eve pointed at herself. "I'm right here in front of you. Wouldn't it work if I help you?" This scared Haley so much that she retreated straight to the door. Her face turned as red as a baboon's bottom and she began to stutter. "This kind of talk isn't for kids like you." Eve rested her chin on her hand, unable to help thinking about her original identity. She was already an adult. She said calmly, "After my birthday this year, I'll be an adult. Besides, there's no other way now." However, he was quite curious. Did she and the founding emperor of Jelani also share a bed? Haley quickly denied it loudly. "How could that be possible? He summoned me just for killing. I didn't have to hold back at all." Haley covered her face in embarrassment and spoke. "I've noticed before, your understanding of demons seems a bit strange." Just as Eve was about to speak, Haley covered her mouth. "You're just a child, don't say so much." She closed her eyes somewhat helplessly. "Not just in the human realm, even in the demon realm, I've never done that kind of thing." "You've asked?" Haley in surprise. "Why is that?" Haley crouched down, answering sheepishly, "I'm just not interested, that's all. I enjoy the thrill that blood brings more." You've suddenly leaned closer to Haley, "So if I help you, I'd be the first person to share intimacy with you." Haley, blushing and heart racing, shouted, "Why do you always have to give that kind of thing special meaning? I've already said I won't share intimacy with you." This woman was truly lucky. Not only had she discovered the precious magic goldwood, but she had also been appointed by her father as the high-ranking lord of the territory. At this moment, Eve thought of a method. Since it had been confirmed that black ironwood was magic goldwood, they could have the villagers help produce blue keys together. And Lady Eve's way of facing this test is to ignite a new flame in this extremely cold land. This would increase production and also promote Alir's development. The Duke sighed. "I didn't expect you to have such affection for Alir." His mood was very heavy. First the Dragon Knights and now the Blue Keys. He feared that once the royal family found out, they would try to restrain Alir. At present, there were only two choices. Either swallow their pride and follow the royal family's arrangements, or make this territory so strong that the royal family wouldn't dare to make a move. The Duke stared at Eve seriously. "Swallowing our pride is not the Oberon family style. Eve, from today on, I appoint you as the Lord of Alien. After you've arranged things here, return to the capital. While you're at it, take care of that philandering crown prince." Hearing the Duke's words, Eve was shocked. She shouted, "Me as the Lord? What about Baron and Sesha?" The Duke indicated that the Baron had already agreed. Eve was helpless now, she could only sigh to the heavens, how did it come to this? The Duke put his hand on Eve's shoulder and slowly said, "You are my Oberon family's daughter. Even without this blue key matter, I wouldn't have left you here unattended. Just go ahead and do it with confidence." After giving all the instructions, the Duke left Alyr. He only left a message saying he would prepare the most splendid banquet for her on the day of Eve's coming-of-age ceremony. Watching the Duke leave, Eve felt a bit sad. If only Eve had known her father's intentions earlier, then she wouldn't have been fooled by the Crown Prince. This woman had transmigrated into a novel and become the main villain. Not only was she exiled to an extremely cold land, but she had also made a contract with a demon. Incessia suddenly spoke up beside her. "The Duke has left, now you need to learn how to govern the territory." In a study, Eve tiredly slumped over the desk. There was still a pile of official business waiting for her to handle. At this moment, Eve desperately wanted to go home. Haley was very confused. "Isn't this your home?" Eve, full of resentment, said, "You don't understand. I finally became a noble lady. Why do I still have to work?" Suddenly, she thought of something. "Haley, how have you been holding up lately?" "You've been suddenly jumped out. Holding up what?" Haley fiercely told Ubit to shut up. This matter had nothing to do with him. Seeing that the two were about to argue again, Eve quickly mediated. Demons, when they suppress their desires for a long time, can lose their sanity. That's why I asked Haley how long he could hold on. Ubit's next words surprised both of them. "You mean that low-level desire that can only be released through killing and physical contact, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, Eve and Haley's faces turned as red as a monkey's bottom. "What are you talking about?" A woman had transmigrated into the villainess of a novel. She even summoned a demon as a pet, but now she was worried sick about the demon losing control. Hearing Haley say he wouldn't sympathize with her, Eve felt helpless because they had no other methods now. What if Haley directly lost control? Eve pointed at Haley. "What if I want to prevent you from losing control through sympathy, but find out you hate this method? Let's first confirm if you can accept being touched. If you can accept it, then we'll use sympathy as the last resort." Haley asked, "How do we confirm this?" "You said it was simple." Then she reached out and grabbed Haley's tie. She closed her eyes and pressed her lips directly onto Haley's. At this moment, Eve was in her dreams. Haley's eyes widened, then Eve let go of her. Haley finally reacted, her face turning bright red, her heart beating louder than thunder. Eve, also blushing, asked how she felt. She herself didn't feel any aversion, so it was okay as long as Haley was fine with it. Haley was stunned, then shyly expressed that she didn't feel averse either. Eve sighed in relief. "That's great. Then let's keep sympathy as the last resort." After resolving Haley's issue under Labacious guidance, Alyr officially began the production of magic crystals. Following the Baron's suggestion, Eve gathered widows to collect black, ironwood branches and leaves. She also hired orphanage children for processing days in the territory passed like this. However, Eve still had one very important thing to do, which was to create an idol. Haley didn't understand what idol meant. Eve winked, "I want you to debut, and as the center position too." Haley sighed, still not understanding what Eve was saying. Eve could only explain to Haley, simply put, "It means becoming the image ambassador here. You'll definitely like it. You're also uncomfortable always appearing as a dog, aren't you?" Hearing Eve's words, Haley became very excited. "I can finally stop turning into a dog. That's too good to be true." Seeing Haley's happy expression, Eve couldn't help but smile too. "I want to show your true appearance to everyone." The scene was too shocking. The little maid had just opened the door only to see her young lady with a strange man. Just now, Emma heard the call bell and walked into the room. "Young lady, did you call for me?" Haley had transformed back in a human form and was watching Eve's sleeping face. This woman is truly unfathomable. She was so cautious earlier, yet she fell asleep so quickly. However, when she saw the scene before her, she froze on the spot. She saw Haley sitting on the sofa with Eve lying on top of him. The two looked very intimate. Emma was about to run out to call the guards when she was pulled back. Eve hurriedly explained to Emma, "You misunderstood." Emma was very worried about her young lady. "Did you accidentally fall onto this man while changing spirits?" Eve nodded. "You know all about it. Why did you still want to call the guards?" Emma slowly stood up. "Because there's a strange man in your room." "Who is he?" "He doesn't seem to be from the village." So Eve introduced Haley to Emma. "He's the dog spirit I told you about before. Actually, he's a person. I plan to introduce him to everyone. I need your help." Before she could finish speaking, Emma collapsed on the ground. This startled Eve. Fortunately, Emma had just lost her balance due to shock. Emma asked how she could help. Eve continued, "You need to vouch for Haley's identity. I'll tell others that he's an expert I invited to train dragon knights. You just need to say he grew up in the same orphanage as you. With Emma's recommendation, Haley successfully joined the Night Order. On the other side, Rai looked at Haley curiously. You say you're the young ladies' guard knight? After receiving an affirmative answer, Rai snorted. He turned to whisper to the other two knights. We've been with the young lady longer, but he's so handsome. Now it's peacetime, and the position of guard knight has become more of a decorative role, so this exceptional promotion didn't face much opposition. After familiarizing himself with the Night Order, Haley returned to his room. Eve greeted him with a smile. I didn't expect it to go so smoothly. No one said anything. After ending this conversation, Eve was sent by her father to the coldest northern region, the Lara. She originally thought it would be a nice place to relax, but as soon as she arrived, she immediately regretted it. She's still a child after all. Haley reached out to touch Eve's hand. Haley suddenly looked around Eve. Then he leaned closer to Eve and whispered, Eve is just the two of us now. Can I speak freely? This beautiful woman, dressed as the infamous Villainess, was now planning to create a super idol. Haley quietly asked Eve if he could speak freely now. Eve smiled and said, of course you can. She then gently patted Haley. Thank you for keeping your promise and pretending to be taciturn in front of everyone. It's mainly because you often say some rather dangerous things. I was afraid you might be misunderstood. Then Eve was about to take Haley to get measured for a few sets of clothes. Eve thought the previous night uniform was too ugly, so she had someone redesign the Night Order's uniform. Haley would definitely look handsome in the new uniform. The title of Dragon Knight was already cool enough. Add a uniform to that and it would be incredible as she thought about it. Eve couldn't help but laugh. If this goes public, people from all over the country will come to Alien to see. This is what I call an idol strategy. Eve nudged Haley. You're the star of this strategy. Haley was indifferent. He thought as long as Eve was happy it was fine. Half an hour later, the two came to the room to start measuring. Haley was confused. Didn't we already measure? Eve smiled and said, did we? It doesn't hurt to measure again. Haley grabbed Eve's hand. You actually finished measuring earlier, didn't you? Eve's face turned slightly red. It's nothing special. I just really like your body. Eve's words made Haley's face turn as red as an apple. No one is without desire. What is your desire? If I could discover your desire, I can find joy. Just then there was some commotion outside the door. Haley wrapped his arm around Eve's waist and lifted her clothes. He gently placed him on the table. Summoner, you're underestimating me too much. I'm a demon after all. Eve stared at Haley, a demon who treats me like I'm fragile. Haley covered his face helplessly. Can't you be a little afraid of me? Eve moved closer to Haley. Well, let me try, she smiled and asked Haley. Are you sure? Do you really want me to do that? Would that make you happy? Haley was silent for a moment, then slumped weakly on the table. Never mind. Eve smiled and said, the current me is better, right? Let's continue measuring. This woman had become the villainess from the novel, yet she was appointed as the lord of the territory. She even had to develop the territory into a tourist city. At this moment, Eve was in a study with Haley. Baron Insisha suddenly arrived. He handed Eve a letter. The royal family had replied. Eve opened the letter and read it carefully. It was just as she had expected. They would proceed according to the original plan, increase the production of blue crystals, prepare to supply the royal family. Insisha looked at Eve without speaking. You've asked him curiously what was wrong. Insisha spoke with great admiration. I just didn't expect that you would accomplish such a big task so smoothly. Eve smiled. She actually had some anxiety. Haley quickly woke Eve up. There's someone in the living room. Could it be an assassin? He thought Haley was overthinking it. What assassin would come to kill me? After Insisha left, Haley asked Eve if something was wrong. Eve patiently explained to Haley, it was about selling the blue keys. There was only one blue key mine in the country. It was monopolized by Count Nita. So I wrote a letter to the Count telling him about our success in making blue keys. The Count, of course, wouldn't let us sell to others. Instead, he wanted us to sell directly to him. However, Eve suddenly discovered that the enemy country, the ruined empire, wasn't far from Alien. She planned to take this opportunity to sell some things there. So Eve wrote these ideas in a letter and sent it to the royal family. Subsequently, the royal family hurriedly came out to mediate. They wrote back to Eve saying that Alyr could sell blue crystals. Eve smiled happily. They're purchasing blue crystals from us is the royal family's way of pacifying us. After all, if we sold to the ruined empire, I would be treated as a traitor. But by then, the royal army probably wouldn't even reach here before Alyr was occupied by the neighboring enemy country, so they had no reason to refuse such a good proposal. Eve said to Haley, even if the worst-case scenario happens, I still have you. Haley immediately got excited. I fully support going to war. Eve helplessly slumped on the desk. There were still many things to do. They still had to negotiate with the Magicians Association. They were the most important customers. Not only did they need to increase the production of blue keys, but they also had to develop the hot springs into a tourist attraction. Eve yawned and exclaimed loudly that she wanted to build a tourist city. It's so tiring. Haley looked puzzled. Aren't we just developing the blue key industry? Eve waved her hand. Since we're doing it, we might as well go big. She was the luckiest woman I've ever seen. Nevertheless, they decided to go out and see what was happening. As soon as they opened the door, they saw a maid crouching by the fireplace, sneaking around. She accidentally discovered rare magic crystals. She even formed a flying dragon knight order. Soon after, the first set of dragon armor was completed. He was very satisfied. It should look great when everyone puts on their uniforms and mounts up. Labasius also asked Eve how she felt. Eve gave him a thumbs up and praised him profusely. Under Ubit's guidance, the knight's strength increased rapidly. The most outstanding among them was Rai. Eve couldn't help but think that her role as the Holy Sword's master might be to discover others' talents. But Ubit denied her words. I chose you without any purpose. When you pulled me out, didn't you do it without any selfish intentions? You're the first person I've met like this. Others all had purposes. They either wanted to become the strongest or seek revenge. But you're different. I believe only you would use me to help others. Eve laughed. You really sound like a holy sword now. She then turned to Haley and said, at this rate, we'll soon be able to introduce the Dragon Knights to the outside world. In the near future, you'll take Ubit and train the Dragon Knights for me. As soon as she finished speaking, she was met with strong opposition from both Haley and Ubit. Eve stated that she was now the Lord and had many official duties to handle. She didn't have time to leave the night training. She couldn't possibly hand Ubit over to someone else. Haley couldn't find a reason to refuse, so he had to agree. Meanwhile, the Count slammed his fist on the table, furious to the extreme. Eve spoke up loudly. What are you doing? The maid was startled and fell back, turning to look at her. That insolent little brat, how much was she selling her magic crystals for? The attendant tremblingly replied, 10% cheaper than us. It said that with long-term contracts, it would be even lower. The Magicians Association seems to be reducing our order quantity. The Count clenched his teeth in anger. How dare she sell them so cheaply? She had pretended to write to me seeking my opinion before, but now she was stabbing me in the back. What's more infuriating is that I trusted the royal family so much, yet they're standing on her side. The Count's hands were shaking with rage. The attendant beside him was terrified. Eve, I will never let you off the hook. This woman had such a good head for business. Not only had she formed a Dragon Knight order, but she also wanted to develop hot springs and create a tourist city. Ailey held a banquet mainly to introduce the Dragon Knights. However, this banquet invited local nobles from the surrounding areas, but not the nobles from the capital. Once again, topics about Alir filled the entire social circle. You've looked at the noisy scene outside the window and asked if the blue key cufflinks were ready. Insesha held a wooden box in his hands. The box was filled with precious blue keys. They've been prepared according to the number of invited nobles. Even nodded, saying it was very well done. When they return with the cufflinks, those capital nobles who pride themselves on being at the forefront of trends will all flock to Alir. Insesha raised a question, are we going to send them invitations? Eve replied, with our current reputation, directly inviting them might backfire. Insesha understood. Then he continued, Countess Nana also said she wants to come. He was also puzzled. I sent her an invitation earlier thinking she wouldn't come. I didn't expect her to be so curious about us. Insesha asked if they should think of some precautionary measures. Eve inquired, you're the maid called Emma, right? As soon as she finished speaking, Emma knelt down. Please spare my life. I wouldn't steal if it wasn't urgent. This concerned the fate of the territory. Eve rubbed her chin, unable to think of a good solution for the moment. At this point, even if we wanted to prevent it, we couldn't. We can only let it be. Then the two discussed a bit more about the hot spring development. Just then Emma came in. Miss, you should go prepare now. Eve had to go prepare for the banquet first. She walked unhurriedly while Emma was about to die of anxiety. Half an hour later, Haley, dressed in a white knight's uniform, appeared before Eve. The outfit matched perfectly with his silver white hair, making Haley look very noble and handsome. Just as Haley was about to greet Eve, he was completely stunned. Eve had been dressed up beautifully by Emma. She looked graceful and elegant, just like a princess. Eve walked up to Haley. What's wrong with you? Haley replied somewhat embarrassedly. You look different today. Eve flashed a brilliant smile. I think this might be the first time I've dressed so formally. Emma put in a lot of effort. Haley shook his head. Unlike others, there's no unpleasant smell either. You didn't understand his meaning. At times like this, you should just say I look beautiful. Hearing Eve's words, Haley's face turned as red as an apple. This woman was truly too beautiful. She had completely captivated the 2,000-year-old demon. Just now seeing such a beautiful dress, Haley couldn't help but blush. You're very beautiful. These are words from the bottom of my heart. You didn't blame her and even said, take whatever you need. These things aren't important to me. Emma was overjoyed. Can I really take the fire with me? Hearing his words, Eve's heart seemed to skip a beat. She bumped Haley's chest. Your little mouth is quite sweet. Then she hurriedly walked towards the banquet hall. At the banquet, everyone was dressed very elegantly. Eve was greeting the nobles everywhere. Suddenly, Count Nita walked up to Eve. I'm honored to be invited to this banquet. You have no idea how much I wanted to see you. Eve sized up Count Nita's standing before her. His physique truly befitted a border lord. Then she politely responded, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Eve O'Brien. I thought you'd be too busy with official duties to come. The Count spoke with a hint of sarcasm. A junior in the industry is just starting out. How could I, as a senior, not come? The tone of the two became confrontational. Neither wanted to lose to the other. Eve chuckled lightly. You speak as if you were there when the country was founded, just a little joke. You don't mind, do you? Then Eve said she had to give the opening speech and left directly. Eve stood in the center, holding a champagne glass, and elegantly began thanking everyone for attending the banquet. I won't waste time, let me introduce you directly. Next, please welcome Alyur's new pride, the Dragon Knight Order. At Eve's command, the dragons all flew out. The guests were all very surprised. The scene was truly spectacular. Eve was confused. Hadn't the butler already distributed the fire to everyone? Emma explained that the Baron had forbidden them from taking the fire out of the mansion. He thought there must be a reason for this, but she couldn't just watch people freeze to death. Who could have imagined that dragons, once humanity's most troublesome enemy, would now willingly serve as mouths? You've looked at everyone's reactions, very satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. After the grand entrance, Haley and Rai would each lead a pair of knights. They would stage a duel. The duel would end with Haley's dramatic victory, emphasizing Haley's outstanding features. Eve applauded, secretly laughing to herself. Today's protagonists were definitely the Dragon Knight Order. Just then, the Dragon Knight Order suddenly walked up to Eve. Eve looked at them in confusion. What was going on? Then the knights all knelt on one knee. They shouted in unison, we swear here today, we pledge our undying loyalty to our lord. Please, my lord, accept our oath. At this moment, Eve was shocked. What was this situation? She didn't want this at all. This woman was dressed as the villainess from the novel. Yet the Knight Order decided to pledge undying loyalty to her. What should she do? At this time, Eve stood by the tree with a gloomy expression. Haley was very confused. Wasn't the banquet quite successful? Why was Eve so depressed? Eve recalled the oath of the entire Knight Order just now. In that situation, Eve could only accept their oaths. She couldn't help but cry out, it's too much pressure. So she decided to personally take the fire out. After changing their clothes, they walked to the door. Sure enough, there was a guard on duty. I originally just wanted to eat, drink, and be merry for life. Now the entire Knight Order wants to pledge undying loyalty to me. I have to be responsible for other people's lives. This responsibility is too great. At this moment, someone came over and asked Haley to go with them for a moment. Eve turned her head and glanced, saying Haley should go first. She needed to be depressed for a while longer. Haley gently patted Eve's shoulder. It was those guys from the Knight Order who decided to do this. Don't worry too much about it, just make sure to always carry you but with you. Eve smiled. I've accepted it, I have to take responsibility now. Then Haley left. Eve was about to go handle her own official duties. The next second, Count Nito walked up to her. She was about to ask the Count if he needed anything, but she saw the Count glaring at her with gritted teeth, his expression very fierce. There was a loud bang and Eve lost consciousness. When she opened her eyes again, Eve felt very dizzy and she had been locked up. Her feet were also chained. What was going on? It couldn't be that the Count had kidnapped her. Could it? Eve held her aching forehead. She had heard he was loyal. She never imagined he would do something like this. Eve quickly asked you, but her mentally what was happening. You but her replied that this should be the dungeon in Count Nita's house. After Eve was knocked unconscious, he used a magic crystal to move her here. Eve felt extremely dizzy. She wondered if she had a concussion. He walked straight up to the guard and told him to open the door. The guard noticed the fire in her hand and politely refused. Jupiter said he could heal Eve first. Eve was puzzled. She didn't expect Jupiter to be able to heal her. She thought he was just a talking sword. Jupiter boasted proudly, I have over 1,000 abilities, you know. Eve couldn't be bothered with what he was saying and told him to hurry up and heal her, but Jupiter said it wasn't possible. To heal, you must hold me and shout, but I was taken away before you were locked up. This man was truly audacious. In broad daylight, he directly kidnapped the Lord. Upon learning that Jupiter was no longer on our person, Eve searched frantically in disbelief, only to find that he was indeed gone. Jupiter said he was likely in the guard's possession. They probably hid him away, thinking he was valuable. Eve was at a loss. What should she do now? Jupiter suggested Eve try summoning the demon. Demons could communicate with their summoners no matter how far apart they were. As soon as Eve attempted to communicate with Haley, she heard Haley shouting her name, which startled her. She laughed nervously. I made you worry, didn't I? Haley immediately said she would come find her. It must have been that Count Nita who did this. Eve looked around, unable to say where she was. I don't know where this place is. She glanced around. There were no distinctive features nearby. Can't you just teleport here? Haley had no other options. That Jupiter had also been taken away by someone else. So Eve could only ask Haley to think of a solution and let her know if she had any news. Eve curled up against the wall. Staying in such a dark place could easily make one depressed. She was very worried. What if Haley couldn't find her? Would she think about finding a new master who could take her to war? Who could tell her why it was so cold here? Eve quickly asked the maid to start a fire, otherwise she would freeze to death. Eve's face immediately darkened. She angrily exclaimed, "How dare you block my way?" Seeing her anger, the guard became frightened and quickly stepped aside. But Haley's tone just now seemed very concerned. Though what was her usual tone like? Just then the door creaked open. Countita walked in. "Ah, little girl, you're awake." As soon as Eve saw Count need his clothes, she immediately stood up and rushed towards him. But as soon as she got up, her head started to spin. Count Nita burst into laughter. "You look quite nice with your spirit crush like this." Eve glared at him. "Is this how a so-called industry senior conducts business?" Count Nita spoke nonchalantly. "I didn't expect you to still be so sharp-toned. People who can't judge situations don't make good business. Apart from the lord of the Nita family and the heir, no one knows about this place. You now have only two choices. Either die here under severe torture or hand over all the blue keys to me." This man was truly outrageous. He dared to kidnap the Duke's daughter and wanted to sign a 500-year oppressive contract with her. Count Nita gave Eve two choices. Then he took out a contract. "This contract is for 500 years. During the contract period, all blue keys from Alir belong to me." Count Nita smiled maliciously, "But I am a businessman after all. I certainly won't take your things for nothing." Once the door was open, Eve immediately told Emma to lead the way. The guard at the door hurriedly followed, saying, "I'm coming too. I'll buy them at 10% of the original price of each blue crystal." Eve replied coldly, "Your chef must be very upset. So much delicious food, yet it only nourished a despicable person." Countess Nita frowned. "It seems you still don't understand the situation. After you've starved for a few days, let's see if you'll still be so sharp-tongued." She then turned and left, leaving Eve alone in the dungeon. She kept thinking about what she should do. Meanwhile, Insisha was looking at a map of Countess Nita's territory. He was very anxious, wanted to find Eve quickly. Haley stared at him, wondering why Luke had specifically transformed into Insisha to come help. But as long as they found the summoner, nothing else mattered. "I hope you live up to your reputation as the leader of the intelligence organization." In the dungeon, Eve asked Ubit and learned that there were two people outside, a guard and another person who was locked up. "It seems this Countess Nita is a habitual kidnapper," Eve sighed. "It's really chaotic." Then she shouted towards the door, saying she needed to use the bathroom, but no one responded. Eve felt that if this continued, she would really become depressed. So she kept making noise, and when she was almost out of words, she started randomly telling soap opera plots. Unexpectedly, the Holy Sword, the guard, and the locked-up person all became entranced. They kept urging Eve to continue, keep going. What happened next? Eve was stunned. She didn't expect the soap opera to be so effective. Suddenly, she had a flash of inspiration and thought of a good plan. Eve was puzzled. Why was he coming along? The guard was on the verge of tears. He had let them go just like that. What if he was blamed later? "Oh, my throat hurts so much. I can't continue. If only I had a glass of water." The guard hesitated after hearing this. The locked-up person kept shouting, "It's just a glass of water. Don't you want to hear the rest of the story?" The guard swallowed hard and finally decided to open the door to bring Eve a glass of water. But as soon as he opened the door to deliver the water, a dazzling light emanated from inside. This beautiful woman was truly brave and resourceful. Locked in the dungeon, she used a clever plan to successfully escape. Just now, when the guard opened the door to bring Eve water, He heard Eve shout, Ubit flashed for 5 seconds, then a dazzling light emanated from inside the door. The door slammed shut. Ubit already retrieved Ubit and snatched the guard's keys. She instructed Ubit to cure her dizziness. The locked-up person seemed completely fine, which was very strange. Just then a voice came, excuse me, have you escaped? Can you let me out too? So Eve opened the door. A man in tattered clothes with long hair and a scruffy beard walked out of the cell. He kept thanking Eve. He said he had been locked up for 6 years. He was very surprised. 6 years. How did you end up here? The man replied that he wasn't sure. He was dragged here before he could figure out why. My father was the previous Count Nita. My uncle killed him and became the current count. Eve didn't know how to comfort him and could only offer her condolences. Then, the man said he knew of a secret passage and offered to guide Eve. Meanwhile, Luke had also found this secret passage. Eve sighed resigningly, fine, come with us. They could advance through here to search and rescue. However, he was very conflicted because revealing information while transformed violated organization rules. He had only transformed into Insetia to see the Dragon Knight. Luke thought that his payment last time was too high, so he felt a bit guilty. He decided to use this to make up for it all at once. So he spoke up, saying it would be better to send an elite for the rescue mission. Haley immediately responded, let me go. Luke was stunned. I understand your intentions, but it's too dangerous for you to go alone. Haley calmly stated, having someone with me would only be a hindrance. Luke watched Haley's retreating figure. That woman's personal guard knight was just as strange as she was. Then Luke removed his disguise. Whatever, you should head back now to. This woman had been locked in the dungeon and had just managed to escape. She even rescued a man along the way. At this moment, Eve and the man were walking through a secret passage. The man kept reassuring her, only the heir would know about this secret passage. Count Nita won't find it. He finally felt relieved. However, she was particularly curious. Why did the Count keep you in prison for 6 years? The man took a few deep breaths and slowly began. On the day it happened, my father told me he had discovered a new magic crystal mine. Before we could make it public, Count Nita made his move against us. Eve was very confused. There's another magic crystal mine. The man nodded, but only my father and I know its location. Eve pondered for a moment, then asked, what do you plan to do after you get out? If anyone scolds you. The man spoke angrily, I want revenge. I must reclaim what's rightfully mine. Then Eve extended her hand to him. Let me formally introduce myself again. I'm Eve O'Brien, the Lord of Alien. If you need help, come find me. The man replied, I'm Brian. Thank you so much for rescuing me, Eve. Eve smiled and said, though I might look a bit disheveled now, I'm still quite capable, and I have something to return to you as well. Uncle Brian's face turned slightly red, momentarily at a loss for words. He grasped Eve's hand, expressing his gratitude once more. Then his expression darkened. Actually, I'm very worried. I don't know what to do next. When I heard you say you could help me, I was truly grateful. I'll definitely repay you. However, Eve said, if you really want to repay me when you develop the mind, don't cooperate with the Crown Prince's faction. Brian, having been in prison for 6 years, was completely out of touch and didn't understand what Eve meant. Eve couldn't explain it clearly at the moment. The next second, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from ahead. Eve was shocked. Could it be Count Nita? Didn't Brian say he didn't know about this passage? Brian looked embarrassed. 6 years ago, Count Nita indeed didn't know. Eve gripped Jupiter tightly, calmly staring ahead. Jupiter prepared to emit light. She was the luckiest woman I've ever seen, escaping the dungeon through wit, rescuing the Count's heir along the way. Just say it was my idea. This woman was supposed to be the evil villain. And discovering a precious magic crystal mine. Just now Eve heard footsteps. She was ready. The footsteps grew closer. Eve raised Jupiter in her hand. Now is the time. The next second, she heard a familiar voice. Eve opened her eyes and saw Haley looking at her with concern. Eve, are you all right? Seeing it was Haley, Eve's legs gave way and she slumped to the ground. You scared me to death. Haley anxiously lifted Eve's face, his eyes full of worry. Are you hurt? How did you end up like this? Eve cried out in frustration. Count Nita is absolutely insane. That guy is so hateful. How could someone treat kidnapping and imprisonment as everyday occurrences? Haley quickly comforted her. They're there. I'll kill him for you. 10 minutes later, they finally reached the exit. Eve, still being held by Haley, asked Brian, are you sure you don't need us to take you to the exit? Brian shook his head. I can go there by myself. He glanced at Haley's fierce expression. I think it's safer if I go alone. Eve waved her hand at him, indicating that her previous words still stood. Remember to come to Alyer to find me. As soon as she finished speaking, Eve and Haley vanished from the spot. After experiencing a series of twists and turns, Eve returned to the territory castle and began to take sick leave. At this moment, Eve was lying on the sofa reading a book. Haley had transformed into a dog and was lying beside her. Seeing Haley's drowsy appearance, Eve couldn't resist leaning over and giving her a kiss. Haley immediately woke up. Despite her terrible reputation, she was about to save a group of children's lives. Emma led Eve to a dilapidated orphanage. "What are you doing? You've just smiled happily because I like you." The next second, there was a knock at the door. "My lord, there's a guest." On the last day of her vacation, the guest Eve had been waiting for finally arrived. Brian spoke calmly, "So you're quite famous." Eve replied with a smile, "You've shaved your beard. I almost didn't recognize you." After a conversation, Brian left with 5 dragon knights, returning to Count Nita's territory. Count Nita's crimes were also made public. Brian chose not to kill him, but instead imprisoned him in the dungeon, making him repent for his crimes for the rest of his life. Brian successfully reclaimed everything that belonged to him. So Eve began to cooperate with a newly appointed Count Nita, Brian. They jointly developed the Blue Key mine and sold it at a reasonable price. It was the most awkward family of 3 I've ever seen. Sitting together for a meal, they looked like strangers sharing a table. At this moment, Eve was having dinner with her brother Archibald and her father. The atmosphere was very quiet. Eve couldn't help but complain in her heart. "If there's nothing to say, why did you say you were worried about me and asked me to come back early?" Eve recalled the day after the kidnapping incident. Incesha suddenly informed the Duke to return to the royal capital immediately. He was puzzled. After all, it was still 2 months before her birthday. Why such a rush? However, Incesha said there were more urgent matters to attend to, such as selling blue keys, and that the Duke was very worried about her. She slowly pushed open the door. Adults might endure, but this place is full of children. Seeing the scene inside, Eve froze in her tracks. So Eve immediately returned to the royal capital. He pulled back her thoughts and couldn't help but sigh. At this moment, Haley came over and asked Eve how the meal was. Eve immediately sat up. "Here, you can't come in and out of my room as you please. There are too many rumors about me outside." She reached out and lifted Haley's chin. "If others found out that my senior brother has been back in the royal capital for so long and is mingling with a handsome guard, I would definitely be crushed by rumors." Haley, however, said not to worry. Eve smiled. "I don't want people to talk about me like that." Haley immediately replied, "Then I'll just make them shut up." After getting Eve's approval, Haley smiled with satisfaction. He was a bit puzzled. It had been a long time since they last hunted flying dragons. Could Haley still suppress her desires? Only then did Haley realize why was she fine. Eve strongly suspected that Haley was forcing herself. But Haley immediately denied it. "I don't want to suddenly lose control of my body after an outburst either." Eve suddenly remembered something. "Is it because of that kiss last time? Besides that, there's no other explanation, right? Since we're talking about this, let me charge you up a bit." Haley didn't understand what charging up meant. Eve directly reached out and grabbed her. "Your desire has been suppressed with great difficulty. What if it suddenly erupts? To prevent such a thing from happening, I need to find opportunities to recharge you at all times." All the children were dressed in very thin clothes, huddling together for warmth. Their faces were red from the cold. She quickly ordered the guard, "Hurry, put the firewood in the fireplace." Then she approached Haley. Haley, with a red face, took the initiative and hugged Eve tightly. After the kiss ended, the two lay embracing on the bed. Could this really have a recharging effect? Eve and Haley gazed at each other, both their faces as red as tomatoes. Just then Emma came over. She brought all the party invitations. Eve had originally wanted to make amends through her coming-of-age ceremony. After all, she had left the previous event due to dishonorable circumstances. It would be more advantageous for her. However, Emma said that this also included an invitation from the king. This immediately startled Eve, causing her to lose color. "This is the most audacious woman I've ever seen." She dared to write a threatening letter to the emperor. And now she's been invited to dine with the emperor. At this moment, Eve was invited to attend the emperor's tea party. She sat in the carriage, feeling very troubled. The letter she had previously written to the emperor was far too presumptuous. The content of the letter was full of defiant words. If the emperor didn't allow her to sell magic stones, then she would have no choice but to betray. Eve covered her face, pondering countermeasures. She had originally thought she would stay in Aelia, but unexpectedly she had now returned. Half an hour later, Eve arrived at the palace. The emperor was smiling, looking very amiable. "No need to be nervous, I just want to have a meal with you." Eve nodded awkwardly. The emperor continued, "I heard you wanted to break off the engagement with the crown prince before. You put on a smile because I love cash and very much at that time, but now I don't want to get involved in the royal family's disputes. The Ember nodded. Cashin was too rash, always fooling around with other women. Once everything was ready, Eve picked up the fire, but the children nearby were all very afraid of her. Perhaps it was her villainous aura that made everyone too scared to approach. I'm truly sorry. Hearing these words, Eve was a bit surprised. She hurriedly said it was fine. After all, people's hearts can change. The Emperor also stopped being polite and got straight to the point. The small waves caused in the north have reached the capital. This wasn't your intention, was it? Eve frowned tightly. She just wanted to live a good life. She answered somewhat embarrassedly. I thought I wouldn't come back to see your majesty again. I won't write threatening letters anymore. The Emperor was a bit surprised. Miss Eve, you're more interesting than I imagined. After meeting with the Emperor as soon as she got home, Eve immediately flopped onto the bed. She frantically pounded the mattress. That annoying old man is driving me crazy. Seeing her like this, Haley quickly asked what had happened. Eve looked at Haley with teary eyes. Haley understood her meaning and immediately transformed into a dog lying in Eve's arms. Eve rubbed its paws while saying, The Emperor is really cunning. No matter what he says, he's always probing other people's thoughts. Pretending not to understand is really exhausting. Haley immediately spoke up. Why don't I go kill him then? Eve was startled. That would be treason. The maid lowered her head and stammered, because Alara only has black ironwood. This type of wood can't be used for fires, so we can only import firewood from outside to get through the winter. Just a few days ago, the Ochre Merchant Guild suddenly cut off the trade. Just as Eve was about to start the fire, a little girl lost her balance and fell to the ground. She accidentally knocked down the fire, extinguishing it. But Haley seemed nonchalant. Let's just kill them all. You can be the Emperor. Eve hurriedly said it wasn't possible. That would cause even more trouble. However, Eve suddenly thought of something that Count Nita had suffered a strange impact in prison. His waist was broken. Hearing this, Haley avoided Eve's gaze. He deserved it. Eve stared at him intently. I see you've been so obedient lately because you nearly killed that guy. Eve was very troubled. Demons were truly terrifying. It seems she needed to find a new method for him. The Haley in front of her suddenly transformed into human form. His face was flushed red and he kept swallowing. This demon who had lived for over 2,000 years. Unexpectedly, she turned into a dog at the slightest disagreement, and she needed her master to comfort her to stop being angry. At this moment, Haley suddenly transformed back into her human form. She looked at Eve with a blushing face. Eve was about to pat her head to comfort her. However, Haley immediately flopped onto the bed, turning back into a dog. Eve stroked her head, indicating that she wasn't afraid of her at all, but Haley didn't believe it. She buried her head in her tail, ignoring Eve. He was also a bit confused. She asked, why would I be afraid of you? Then she reached out to cup Haley's dog face, looked in her eyes seriously, and said, we've already made a promise. I believe you won't hurt me. Then she hugged Haley tightly. You're a powerful demon. I'm just an ordinary human, so make up with me, okay? After reconciling, they lay down together again. Haley mumbled, it was that Count Nita who hurt you. That's why I wanted to kill him. Eve also felt a bit embarrassed. She had misunderstood Haley. Haley snorted coldly, burrowed into Eve's embrace, and fell into a deep sleep. Emma fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. The young lady gave us fire, and then several people burst into tears together. Eve gently patted her back, thinking to herself she was very happy. She had become a dog trainer now. After the two stayed quietly for half an hour, a voice came from outside the door. The prince has arrived. Eve immediately sat up. Was it Linton who had come? Eve couldn't figure out why Linton would come to see her. Could it be because of the blank check she gave to Luke? He was a bit angry. It was very likely that Luke could spend a large sum, so Linton came to settle accounts with her. Eve angrily pushed open the door. Hey, how much did you spend? Linton was completely confused. What was she talking about? Eve coldly said, don't pretend. Aren't you here to question me about the blank check? Now Linton finally understood, so that blank check was given by Linton, and Eve also realized that the Linton in front of her was actually Luke in disguise. Eve became even angrier. You're throwing your weight around in the capital as the prince. Are you trying to arrest me? Luke said he wasn't, but he felt like he had been tricked. After all, he had put in a lot of effort to rescue Eve. It turned out to be Linton's money. Eve looked at him coldly. That was given to me by Linton. It's my money. That's right, but Eve still had to thank Luke. Thanks to him, she was able to escape easily. Luke suddenly leaned closer to Eve, staring at her for a good while. Eve sighed helplessly. She then communicated with Haley through her thoughts. Then he sighed, well, it doesn't do me any harm anyway, and turned to leave. Before leaving, he left a sentence. I haven't used the check yet. You've made so many enemies. Be careful of those who might stab you in the back in the future. Eve crossed her arms. Mind your own business. What nonsense. This man was a demon who had lived for over 2,000 years, yet he would feel dizzy and nauseous in crowded places. Just recently, Eve, before her birthday, had declined many social invitations, but the most important thing in doing business was knowing the current trends. So Eve decided to go for a walk in the streets with Haley. She changed into a brown dress and also put on a black cloak. She asked Emma, "How does it look? Will people recognize me now?" Emma nodded, praising Eve for looking very dashing, so Eve and Haley walked to the marketplace together. The street was bustling with people coming and going. Small vendors were also doing their business. Seeing Haley walking towards them, they were all stunned. This man was just too handsome. Eve was helpless. She had forgotten about the big trouble that was Haley. Now they were surrounded by a crowd of people. Eve felt a bit of a headache. She had grown so accustomed to Haley that she'd forgotten how handsome she was. Like the fire, Haley was confused with so many people watching. Are you sure? Eve frowned deeply. We have no other choice now. We can't just let them die. She spoke to Haley. What was supposed to be a secret stroll through the streets had now turned into an outing with a young master. Haley asked to Eve, puzzled, "Don't you like handsome people?" Eve hurriedly denied it, and she came up with an idea. Let's say you're a young master with an attendant. You can attract attention, making it easier for me to move around. Eve looked at everything in the market with great enthusiasm. However, Haley suddenly said she felt like vomiting. She covered her mouth, looking very uncomfortable. Eve panicked a bit. She hadn't expected Haley to feel so disgusted just by being around humans. Haley was still trying to act tough, saying she was fine. Eve directly reached out and pulled Haley into her embrace. We'll find a place with fewer people. It'll be all right. Eve led Haley to a less crowded alley. She placed her hand on Haley's face, which still hadn't regained its color. Haley explained that it had been too long since she'd been in a crowded place, and she wasn't used to it yet. This left Eve speechless. You should have said so earlier. I could have brought someone else. Hearing her words, Haley quickly spoke up. If you just hugged me like you did earlier, I'll feel better soon. As soon as the words left her mouth, Eve embraced her. Haley hugged Eve back tightly, feeling as if she had come back to life. Seeing Haley's color improve, Eve decided to buy a drink to calm her own nerves. She told Haley to wait there and then. When Eve returned with 2 drinks, she saw a person wearing a red cloak approaching Haley. This stunningly beautiful woman before her was the noble Duke's daughter, yet she was being berated on the street by her former fiancé. Haley smirked. I'm willing to serve my summoner. With a wave of her hand, the fireplace was instantly lit, emitting a blazing light. Just moments ago, Eve had gone to buy drinks and returned, only to find a woman approaching Haley. She reached out to touch Haley, saying, I just want to help you. Let's go see a doctor. Haley's face immediately darkened. I told you not to touch me. Eve quickly walked over, seeing Eve. Haley's expression immediately brightened. She flashed a brilliant smile. Eve, let me carry the drinks. The woman was surprised to hear Eve's name. Eve handed the drinks to Haley and spoke to the girl. There's no need to call a doctor. She's with me. As soon as she finished speaking, Eve realized something was off. The woman in front of her was none other than Catherine, the protagonist of the novel. Catherine was also surprised. Oh, it's Lady Eve. I was passing by and saw her looking unwell, so I came to inquire. Eve was momentarily at a loss for words, so she just waved her hand, indicating that she needed to leave. However, Catherine looked hurt. How about made you uncomfortable? Before Eve could respond, a man's voice came from the entrance of the alley. Eve, get away from her right now. It was Kachin. He glared at Eve, fuming with anger. He immediately pulled Catherine aside and demanded to know what Eve had done to her. Before Catherine could answer, Kachin started shouting, You've gone too far. Not only did you interfere with the magic crystal situation, but now you're following us around. All to get my attention, right? The children were stunned. Big sister, are you a magician? Eve smiled and made a shushing gesture. You must keep it a secret for me, okay? Hearing his words, Eve was utterly speechless. She held her head and said to Haley, let's leave quickly. My stomach is starting to feel unwell too. Cashin reached out, trying to grab Eve's clothes. If you want to leave, apologize to Catherine first. But before his hand could touch Eve's clothes, Haley restrained him. Haley twisted Cashin's arm behind his back. Where do you think you're touching? Haley was furious. You dare touch my master again and you'll face the consequences. Then she flung Cashin to the side. Catherine looked at the disheveled Cashin and hurriedly asked if he was all right. Eve frowned as she glanced back at Cashin, then promptly took Haley's hand. The two walked away without looking back, leaving only Cashin and Catherine behind. In the afternoon, Eve was enjoying afternoon tea in the mansion when Haley suddenly said she needed to go out for a while. Eve was puzzled. "Where are you going?" Haley quickly replied that she wanted to teach the guy called Cashin a lesson. The earlier encounter wasn't satisfying enough. Ubit also strongly supported Haley. Someone who knows swordsmanship dares to threaten a person with weak strength. Haley and Ubit's opinions immediately reached a consensus. Eve was stunned. She was a villain. It was normal to be despised by everyone. Eve felt extremely happy. This was the first time someone stood up for her. As soon as she finished speaking, Eve prepared to leave with Haley. Emma stayed behind to accompany the children for the night. They all hugged each other tightly. This woman was dressed as a villainous evil lady who would have thought someone would stand up for her. At this moment, Eve felt extremely happy. It was the first time someone would stand up for her. She flashed a beautiful smile. "Thank you both." This smile made Haley blush. "I will protect you from now on. No one will hurt you." Haley's disrespect towards the crown prince was a serious crime, but Cashin didn't expose it. Cashin couldn't bear the scandal of being beaten up by his former fiancé's guard. Days passed quickly. Eve's 18th birthday was approaching. Everyone in the mansion was busy decorating for the evening party. Eve was pacing back and forth in the hall, holding her speech. She felt a headache coming on. "This is too difficult. I'd rather write a few project proposals." Eve sat on the sofa, full of complaints. "Can't they just invite someone randomly? Why does the birthday girl have to prepare the guest list?" Emma quickly replied, "Because this is the most important part for the host." "Who do you want to invite?" Eve was stumped because she hadn't thought about who to invite. Emma continued, "This is the young lady's most important day. You should spend this happy time with important people." Emma suggested, "If we send invitations according to prestige and status, it would be much simpler." Eve felt enlightened and continued to work on the guest list with renewed energy. Meanwhile, Haley was stroking the dragon's head. Eve walked over with a grin, thinking to herself, "Whose dog is this? It's so handsome." Emma recalled how desperate she had felt when she learned she would become the young lady's personal maid. But she never expected that the young lady with such a terrible reputation would help complete strangers. "It's so cool." Ever since Haley arrived, many maids would peek at her from the doorway. As she thought about this, Eve turned to the maids with a cold expression. "Who gave you permission to peek?" The maids were startled. "We're sorry, young lady, please forgive us." At this moment, Haley also noticed Eve. She happily waved at Eve. Eve walked up to Haley. "Are you gonna train?" Haley said she had just finished a round of training. Noticing Eve staring at her, Haley became a bit flustered. Eve spoke softly. "I noticed your hands are very beautiful." She then extended her own hand to Haley. "Let me show you my hand too." However, Haley was surprised. She grabbed Eve's hand. "Why is it so pale? There's no color at all." Haley anxiously asked Eve, "Have you not been eating well lately?" Eve was stunned. She had even gained weight since coming back. Immediately after, Haley reached out and grabbed Eve's waist. He lifted Eve up effortlessly, still so light. Eve smiled helplessly. "If you ever reach a point where you can't lift me, I might be heavier than a dragon." The next second a voice came, "Thank you for allowing me to see the Dragon Knight." This woman was truly lucky. She had easily pulled out the holy sword and learned she could inherit the throne. Just now Roth had suddenly come over. Emma made up her mind from now on. She would serve the young lady with unwavering loyalty. The next day, the servants kept greeting Eve, but she found it extremely annoying. Eve smiled and said it was no trouble. Thanks to the books Roth lent her, the Dragon Knight was able to train with ease. Then Eve introduced Haley to Roth. Haley is the first knight of the Dragon Knight Order. Neither Roth nor Haley spoke. They stared at each other in silence. Looking at Haley's familiar silver hair and red eyes, Roth said with certainty, "I've seen you before." As soon as he finished speaking, Haley's clothes immediately covered his face. How could that be possible? Roth continued, "My ancestor was very good at painting. A few of his works still remain. Is Haley a descendant of the great mage? You look very similar to the painting." He finally relaxed. As long as his true identity wasn't discovered, it was fine. Haley nodded, indicating that his ancestors had indeed used magic. He quickly changed the subject, saying she wanted to show Roth the dragon first. However, Haley has a suggestion. What's the point of just looking? He smiled at Roth and said, "How about taking a ride yourself? I'll control it." 10 minutes later, Haley finally brought Roth down. Roth could barely stand at this point. Just now on the dragon's back, Haley would sometimes dive, sometimes do a spin. He nearly made Roth throw up yesterday's meal. He was a bit worried about Roth's. "If you're too dizzy, why don't you rest at the narrow bottom before leaving?" She quickly left the hall and found a quiet corner to sit down. She recalled her conversation with the butler this morning. Eve had suggested distributing the fire to everyone if there was no special reason not to. The butler could only agree. Roth quickly refused. I need to return to the city immediately. He thought the Knight Commander was really busy. But Roth's next words made Eve break out in a cold sweat. Did you know that the holy sword on Fog Mountain has been pulled out? Our knights are all searching for it. Eve widened her eyes in surprise. Why are you looking for the person who pulled it out? Seeing that she didn't know the whole story, Roth patiently explained. The holy sword has a close relationship with the Gerent royal family. Our ancestor pulled out the sword, declaring to the world that he was the master of the holy sword, and said this sword was left for his descendants. Haley couldn't help but secretly scoff. Jard himself couldn't pull it out and take it away, yet he spoke so grandly. Then Roth dropped a bombshell. The person who pulls out the holy sword is the top priority heir to the throne of the Gerent kingdom. These words were like a thunderbolt. He was already annoyed to death. She immediately wrote a letter to Rabashu. Rabashu replied, saying that only the scabbard that comes with the sword can identify the holy sword. It will react to tools that can sense magic. Haley nonchalantly said if they were discovered, they could just say it was a magic sword. Eve sighed. This was the only method now, but they would have to put Yuba away for a while. Yuba understood Eve. She would wait quietly. Half an hour later, Eve met her brother Archibald in the corridor. He was very curious. Isn't Ochre the merchant guild of the Crown Prince's maternal grandfather's family? Thinking about this, Eve suddenly remembered the plot from the novel. Crown Prince Leiden was a character with a tragic fate. Not only did he lose his mother at a young age, but the throne was also snatched by Cashin. He committed suicide not long after the male and female leads got married. But now Eve was very angry. Why treat the villagers of Alara like this? It was because of this that Eve had earned the respect of all the servants. Everyone was very grateful to her. Just then, a servant's report interrupted Eve's thoughts and surprised her greatly. Archibald looked at her coldly, then he handed Eve a scroll. Eve took it, not understanding. As soon as she opened it, she was shocked pale. This man was really too much. An engagement ceremony with his new girlfriend. It was to be held on the day of his former fiancé's birthday. Upon hearing this news, Eve wasn't surprised. However, it also meant that the number of guests at his birthday would be reduced, but the Duke was in a very bad mood. This was a blatant provocation. Eve closed her eyes briefly. She had already invited everyone she wanted to invite. After all, this wasn't her real birthday. The Duke sighed, telling Eve not to worry. He would do whatever it took to ensure Eve had a perfect birthday. Eve felt touched inside and thanked her father with a blushing face. Later, this became a hot topic of discussion. Everyone was debating whose party would have more attendees. They even divided the two princes into different factions, forcing them to decide whether to participate. Eve herself hadn't anticipated that the political issues surrounding the birthday party would be so much bigger than she had predicted. Meanwhile, Haley and Archibald's actions were going very smoothly. He was receiving a steady stream of magic crystal orders. On this day, he was having a spa treatment. Emma excitedly said that she would introduce someone to Eve in a moment. A moment later, 3 women entered. They were top stylists in the fashion world. The 3 women gathered around Eve, ready to start selecting a gown for her. A dark-colored gown seems to suit you better. Eve nodded. After all, Catherine would probably wear white at the party. She didn't want to clash. The fashion designer Lana praised. As expected, your taste is certainly excellent. Young lady, Lord Cashin has arrived. This was the most narcissistic scumbag she had ever seen. He thought himself very charming, but was directly rejected by this woman. Then they prepare to choose the theme of the gown. What kind of gentleman will be escorting you? Eve pointed to Haley, standing nearby. My knight is my partner. Looking at Haley's handsome face, the stylists were immediately smitten. However, Haley was confused. What a sport. I've never heard about this. Only then did Eve remember that Haley would be uncomfortable in crowded places. She had chosen Haley because being escorted by family would make her look like a child. Haley put her hands on her hips and said proudly, looks like there's no choice. I'll have to go with you. As soon as she finished speaking, Eve was stunned. Didn't you say you wouldn't go? Haley said awkwardly. I never said I wouldn't go. I just worried you'd be embarrassed going with a clumsy knight. It would be embarrassing. Haley let out a long sigh. Then she slowly walked up to Eve. She knelt on one knee with a slightly reddened face. Haley spoke softly, please allow me to escort you. All right, he was quite surprised, but she still placed her hand in Haley's palm. She smiled slightly, of course, my knight. Hearing that Cashin had come, Eve was shocked. What was he doing here? But since he had already arrived, Eve had no choice but to meet him. This brother is so generous. He's giving his sister 30 gifts for her birthday. At this moment, Eve looked at the scroll in her hand with shock. Archibald spoke matter-of-factly, "This is the list of your birthday gifts. Pick 30 from it." Eve froze. So many. Archibald was about to leave. "If you choose early, Father can focus on work. Give me the list when you're done." Eve called out to Archibald, "This is too long. I have other things to do." She smiled and said, "Brother, I don't care what gifts I receive. If you want me to cooperate, then listen to my request." Actually, Eve's main purpose for returning to the capital was to increase her clientele, because the customers from Magic Crystals were only the royal family and the Magicians Association. And Eve's image wasn't suitable for public appearances. She took out a magic crystal brooch. Because it was infused with magic, it would constantly emit a pleasant fragrance when worn. Archibald thought this should be quite expensive. Hive explained that the Magicians Association had sold it to her at a discount. As for the stone decorations, she produced them herself. Many magic stones nowadays were difficult to process. Our magic crystals are very easy to process. Eve handed the brooch to Archibald, "So brother, please wear this. It will make your body emit a pleasant fragrance. Just go to the banquet, make a round, and you can come back, and you need to go with Haley." Eve said with a grin, "I've already selected 5 banquets being held today." Archibald was very surprised, "But why do I have to go with your guard?" Eve wondered, puzzled after what she had said to him. He still came. Eve thought to herself, "This scene wasn't in the original novel, but maybe it's because it's unrelated to Catherine, so it wasn't written." Eve smiled even more brightly. "Of course, because flowers look more beautiful when gathered together." Archibald sighed helplessly, "Then hurry up and prepare a gift list for me. Are there any more brooches?" Hearing this, Eve took out a box. Inside were not only brooches but also rings and cufflinks. Archibald smiled. "According to protocol, shouldn't you give it to Father first? Please make sure to put it on him yourself." Eve was instantly dumbfounded. Archibald questioned, "You can make me attend 5 banquets in one day, but you can't even do this yourself." You could only agree. 5 minutes later, she arrived at the Duke's room. Eve frowned as she knocked on the door. The thought of being alone with the Duke was truly stressful. As soon as the door opened, Eve saw the Duke's gloomy face. She reluctantly entered the room. She placed the cufflinks on the table. "It would be great if you could accept these, Father." At this moment, Eve was trembling with fear, hoping the Duke would accept them quickly. Then she could slip away. The Duke nodded, and Eve offered to help him put them on. The Duke extended his hand. Eve quickly put the cufflinks on for him. The Duke stared at Eve and suddenly spoke, "They're getting engaged." Eve thought to herself, has the aide progressed that far? The Crown Prince is getting engaged to Catherine. The Duke gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. He said angrily, "And they dared to make the engagement date coincide with your birthday." Eve slowly pushed open the door. She greeted him coldly. "It's been a while." Cashin sat on the sofa looking impeccably groomed. He smiled at Eve. "You're looking well these days." Eve was speechless. Wasn't he supposed to be here incognito? Looking at his radiant appearance with every hair perfectly in place, he didn't look like someone trying to keep a low profile at all. "You couldn't be bothered with small talk. What brings you here, Your Highness?" Cashin changed the subject. "Noble Lady Eve, I didn't expect you to be living so comfortably in this remote place, and without my company no less." Hearing his words, Eve froze on the spot. She had only one thought, is there something wrong with his head? Eve asked bluntly, "What exactly do you want?" Cashin smiled at her. "I just wanted to see you. I know you're putting on a brave face. You must be so lonely without me." Eve felt goosebumps all over her body. Her contempt for Cashin grew even stronger. So this was how he had manipulated Eve in the past, ignoring her usually but sweet-talking her when he needed something. What a scumbag. You couldn't help but compare him to Haley. When it came to looks, Haley was definitely more handsome.